Hey, what's up, everyone? On this writing tips episode, we're going to be talking about twists or surprise endings. More specifically, the latter, and how basically a twist works to create a surprise ending, basically, and how to kind of basically effectively apply one to your story. Now, this is one of those weird things where technically, by the book, a twist or a surprise ending is kind of a bit of a narrative no officially, because essentially you're when you create a story, when you're telling a narrative, you're creating a sequence of events that are leading up to what should hopefully be kind of an assumed or a satisfactory conclusion, meaning the sequence of events that you kind of set forth, put in motion, are kind of wrapped up. They're kind of closed off. So your story has a very clear and concise beginning, middle, and end. Basic storytelling 101. Now, what twists or surprise endings do, they basically take what's been set forward or put into motion by you, the storyteller, and kind of turn on their head by kind of going against the perceived outcome. And I know that basically all that kind of sounds like a lot of gobbledygook or a lot of just kind of fancy wording for essentially you're just surprising the reader or the viewer. So, what are some good examples of this? Well, two that really come to mind are The Sixth Sense and Fight Club, the two films. And basically, the reason for this, if you watch this now, for those of you who haven't seen, these movies I'm talking about, spoilers, I'm going to ruin the ending. So if you haven't seen them yet and you don't want to be spoiled, stop watching this and go watch them. And if you have, then you pretty much probably already know where I'm going with this. And if you haven't and just don't care, then, thanks for watching the video and continue to do so. So basically, in The Sixth Sense, it follows a boy played by Haley Joel Osment who can see dead people. Basically, he can see and talk to ghosts, and he's kind of joined on this journey of self-discovery by Bruce Willis's character, who plays like his therapist. I'm not sure if he was a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but someone who's basically helping him out, because obviously initially his mother thinks he's depressed or something wrong with him, so Bruce Willis kind of works with him, and he explains to Bruce Willis what's going on, and Bruce Willis naturally is skeptical at first, as anyone would be if someone told you they can see dead people. But then through kind of the course of his investigation in this boy and kind of his treatment of it, he realizes, yeah, he really can see ghosts, and basically helps him through the process, saying you can't unsee them. This ability is not going to just go away. So you need to do something with it. You need to learn to kind of take control of it and do something positive with it, so it doesn't feel so much like a curse. And basically what he helps them to do is, okay, why are these ghosts talking to you? Why are they reaching out to you? What do they want? And basically, a lot of them are looking for closure. They're looking to kind of either resolve their deaths or, just maybe have, try to communicate with the ones they left behind to kind of resolve any issues. In the case of one girl, she was apparently murdered. I can't remember if it was her father or stepfather, but she was murdered, and basically the evidence is somewhere, and then Haley Joel Osment helps, the ghost find the and bring the man to justice who killed her, who poisoned her. And in doing so, he basically kind of becomes empowered. He feels like, okay, I'm helping them because they're not bad. These ghosts are not like, like haunted house, scary ghosts. They're people who, a lot of them have been wrong. Then they're just trying to make peace with what happened to them. And, it's a really interesting story. And you basically feel like, okay, and you see that Bruce Willis, his life is kind of, his personal life seems like it's in kind of ruin, that, he seems to have no real relationship with his wife anymore. So you kind of feel like, oh, okay, well, he's kind of reconnecting with someone, through this boy, as he helps this boy kind of connect with all these spirits who are trying to talk to him. And then we get to the ending where we find out that, remember I said spoilers, Bruce Willis was a ghost the whole time. He was dead and didn't know. And that was the other thing, too, that some of these ghosts may not realize they're ghosts. They may not realize that they're dead, that the manner in which they died was so traumatic that they don't really remember it. And in the very beginning of the film, you see Bruce Willis get shot by a former patient, and then we just assume that, okay, he got shot, and maybe that messed him up, and that's why he Doesn't seem to have much of a relationship with his wife, and turns to find out he doesn't have a relationship with his wife anymore because he's dead. And then, in which you go back and watch the film and you realize you never actually see him verbally interacting with anyone he's on screen with other than, Haley Joel Osment. So then you take a situation like Fight Club, where it's, Edward Norton, Brad Pitt's character, they kind of create this almost cult-like organization called Fight Club. And that basically Edward Norton's character is kind of boxed in this kind of mundane, ordinary life. And, Brad Pitt's character comes in and essentially liberates him from that, teaches him to push beyond his boundaries, to go beyond the boundaries put forth by society. And the people around him who buy into all that almost kind of revere him, Brad Pitt's character as this messianic figure, but at the same time have this almost this odd sense of fear of him. Like, and you really can't put your finger, like, why they're so enamored with him, yet so, almost fearful. They almost kind of view him as the way you would like something like a lion or a bear. You're kind of awestruck by the beauty and the power of it, but you're also naturally afraid of it. And then you find out at the end of the film that Brad Pitt's character never actually existed, that he is a figment of Edward Norton's mind, that it's basically split personality, that it's another personality that basically is acting out the way Edward Norton's character has always wanted to. Excuse me. And that what these people are seeing, the reason why they're kind of so enamored with him is that they're enamored with kind of, Edward Norton when they see him giving these grand speeches and basically really speaking to a part of them that they always felt is there, but that they could never really act on. But then they would also see him kind of flip out, and when you would see in the film him arguing with Brad Pitt is actually him kind of arguing with himself, or beating himself up, or just basically having a psychotic fit. So to them, he's kind of this mad genius. So when you finally reveal that, you realize that, oh my God, that Edward Norton was really essentially this insane character for the audience. So then the question is like, okay, you have your surprise ending, you have your twist, and it throws everyone for a loop, and it really catches your audience by surprise. So you get that like moment. But what then? How does your film, or how does your story, whether it's a book or a film or anything else really, how does it function after that? Does it still work as a cohesive narrative, or is it now that the cat's out of the bag, and that's it? It's a one-time, kind of a one-trick pony of a story. That's the problem you might run into, and that's where you have to get creative. So when you look at The Sixth Sense or Fight Club, do they still work as compelling narratives once you know the secret, once the twist is revealed? And the answer, well, in my opinion anyway, is yes, because then you get to go back and watch these films as they actually are, and see what you're really were seeing the whole time, but didn't realize. When you look at the scene where Haley Joel Osment's character is introduced to Bruce Willis's character for the first time, he walks in to the room, and you see his mother sitting in a chair, and across from her you see Bruce Willis sitting in a chair. And his mother says something briefly before she gets up and leaves the room, and then he starts interacting with Bruce Willis. And when you watch it the first time, you just kind of assume that she and Bruce Willis were talking before he came in the room, and that they were probably saying, okay, I'm the therapist, I'm the one who's going to help him out. And it's just kind of an assumed scenario. But you never actually see them speaking. You never actually see them acknowledging one another. And in fact, Haley Joel Osment's mother is just kind of sitting there. She's not even really looking at Bruce Willis. But you don't pick up on that. Your brain kind of fills in a lot of the gaps, whether you realize it or not. Like, and that's kind of an art to storytelling, is that it's giving you the viewer or the reader just enough for your brain to kind of fill in the gaps without you realizing it. So in your mind, you're actually recalling a lot more than you actually saw. Like in your mind, you realize, okay, well, Bruce Willis and the mom were there having a conversation, and then Haley Joel Osment comes in, and then basically she says, okay, now here's your therapist here to help you. When really none of that happened. It's like maybe a 3 or 4 second shot with her just sitting there and him sitting there, not communicating, not even looking at one another, basically not acknowledging each other's presence in any capacity. And then the scene plays out. But you just assume that, well, clearly they were talking just before he came in. No. Scenes where Bruce Willis's wife is at dinner, and they're not, and he's begging her just to talk to him, to communicate with him, and she basically just says something very dismissive and walks off, and you just assume that him saying talk to me is just relationship problems, let's talk about it, and her basically just being dismissive and walking off is her basically just frustrated with him, when in actuality she was celebrating their anniversary by herself and she's just depressed. You don't pick up on that because it's shot in such a way and it's played out in such a way where your mind fills in the assumed blanks. But clearly, him saying, talk to me, communicate with me is just, basically a couple's issue. And her not really acknowledging him is her just basically growing, distant from him. It's a relationship problem. It's clearly not because he's not actually there or that she just doesn't see him because he's dead. But when you go back and watch the movie after you know the truth, suddenly the movie takes on a whole different life and it becomes this fun kind of exercise in seeing, okay, how was Bruce Willis there in the scene without those characters not actually knowing he's there, and how are they effectively, performing and playing out in the scene with him not there? And then you basically kind of watch their performance as if he's not there, and you kind of get into the mind of those characters to kind of what this scene is for them as opposed to what you thought it was. Same thing with Fight Club, where when you go back and you realize all those scenes where Edward Norton and Brad Pitt are having a conversation, and you realize what that actually was. It was Edward Norton talking to himself. So when you see them fighting in the alley, what that looks like, and they actually show what that looks like too at one point, where after it's revealed that Brad Pitt was just not actually there, or he was there but he was in his mind. He didn't have a literal physical personification to the rest of the world. It was Edward Norton's character kind of projecting that alter ego, that other personality, in front of him, so he can kind of have a back and forth. Whereas to the rest of us, it's just Edward Norton talking to himself, beating himself up. And then it's fun then to go back and watch the movie and realize what is actually happening, what the rest of the characters are actually seeing when this is happening, and the film takes on almost like this hyperbolic quality. You really, it's just how mad the whole film really was. I mean, it was kind of a crazy movie to begin with, but then when you see it, it's like, and you realize what it actually is, you realize how much more insane what you were actually watching was the whole time, and what that must have been like for the characters around Edward Norton the whole time. So those are two examples of how you can have a surprise ending, a twist, and have it be effective, and how then you can still enjoy the material after the fact. And you'll never be able to have that surprise ever again. That's a one-time thing, unfortunately. But you can still then enjoy these films in a very different way. You can kind of perceive them and approach them in a different way that gives you an equal amount of enjoyment. Different but equal. And that's where you have to be careful, because you don't want to create a narrative that literally exists solely for that shock, that moment of like, oh, like what a twist. You don't want it to just be about that, because if it is just about that, every little bit of it is just about that one moment of shock when you get the reveal, then your story won't have kind of any repeat value. And what I mean by that is, you're not going to really want to go back and read, watch, or experience that story again, because the whole point of it is done. I mean, it doesn't have anything else. It's not interesting enough on its own. It's just a narrative, twist or no twist. Because that's the thing. I mean, the great thing about something like Fight Club or The Sixth Sense is that even though, Brad Pitt's character was never actually real, even though Bruce Willis was a ghost the whole time, until you get to that moment, until you get to that reveal, it is played out in such a way where Brad Pitt might as well be real. Bruce Willis might as well be alive. They both play out as, fully realized characters enough for the narrative to go on as such. And because there's peculiar circumstances of who and what they are, doesn't have any visually adverse effect on the people around them or the characters, you can easily just sit back and still enjoy it. as what it is. And then when you get to the moment where it's like, oh, you're dead, or oh, you weren't real. Yes, you'll never have that repeat shock value, but it doesn't detract from the comprehensive, interesting story that was being told before. And because now you know what the surprise is, you can, again, like I say, you can enjoy it in a different way. You can watch the film differently and realize, okay, I know what they're showing me, but I know what I'm actually seeing. So what does that mean for everything that's happening around? And it becomes fun because then you start looking at background characters, especially in Fight Club. We start looking at these people when Brad Pitt is giving speeches, and you see Edward Norton kind of off to the side watching. But then you realize what's actually happening, what they're actually seeing. So then when Edward Norton is having an argument with Brad Pitt or a discussion with them, what those other characters are seeing, and watch their faces, watch their performances. I'm fairly certain the director probably obviously explained to them what's going on. I'm sure they read the script, so they knew he probably got specific direction to maybe respond and react and just give visual cues as if they were seeing essentially a crazy person, as opposed to what we, the audience, were seeing. So then it's fun to go back and really watch every aspect of the film, watch all the characters in the background, really kind of see how they're responding, because you might start noticing things that you didn't notice on the first go around because you just assumed that what you were seeing was what you were getting, as you were taking the film just at face value. So you weren't really thinking much of it, but now that you are, you're looking at everything, you're studying every detail. Same thing with The Sixth Sense. You're studying other characters around them. You're studying just how much Bruce Willis is having an effect on the scene, or not, as the case turns out. So those are examples of narratives and surprise endings that work very well. But like I said, you have to make sure that you still have a compelling enough story without the twist, that you can still go back and enjoy that. Because if everything is pieced together just for that, well, okay, fine, it works for the surprise twist, but then the story doesn't become interesting, and you might be just kind of, also when you watch it or read it, you might be kind of thinking, well, I don't know, I'm not really that engaged, not really that compelled. And then when you have the surprise, like, oh wow, that was shocking, but the whole narrative was designed in such a way just for that moment. That was the whole purpose of the film or the book, was just to get that initial that one moment of like, and that's it. There's nothing after it. There's nothing really before. So you got it's like a brief like high, but beyond that, you're not gonna go back and watch it because aside from that moment, there was nothing really compelling about it. So just make sure that kind of like when I was describing how to do a sympathetic villain, I was like, it's a balance. You don't want to make them too evil, because then no matter what they do at the end, it'll never be good enough to redeem them. Or in certain cases, depending on what they do, they still have to die, because you will never truly be able to forgive them if they go around living when other people don't get to. Same thing with here. You don't want to just make the story too much of a connected dots to get to that surprise ending, so the surprise ending makes sense, but you focus so much on it and from a mechanical standpoint that you forgot to just make it interesting. It's one of those things where I wish I could kind of give you a more comprehensive plan for how to make your story interesting, unfortunately, but there really is no like blueprint. Essentially, even with a story with a surprise ending or a twist, you still have to tell a good story. And to do that, you still have to follow the basics. You have to have interesting characters. You have to have an interesting plot. So even if the plot is not quite what we think it is, it still has to be interesting. It still has to engage us, whether it's a lie or not. And then the reveal after the end will be like, oh, it wasn't what we thought at all. But in the meantime, while you thought it was what it was interesting. You were engaged. And because of that, you'll still want to go back and rewatch it or reread it, because you had a good time with it up until you get to the surprise where you realize it's all a farce. It's fun and it's interesting. And the characters, regardless of who they are or who they're not, or what they are or what they're not, they're still interesting characters. It doesn't matter that Bruce Willis was ultimately never alive and was just a ghost who needed help like all the others. He was an interesting character, so it's interesting to follow him through the story. Same thing with Brad Pitt in Fight Club. It doesn't matter that technically he wasn't a real person. when he was on screen, he's electrifying. He's charismatic. You can't help but listen to him and watch him. He's interesting. It doesn't matter that he's just a figment of Edward Norton's imagination. It's really psychosis. He's interesting when he's on screen, and therefore you don't care that he's not real, because what he's saying is interesting all the same, even though you find out later on that was really Edward Norton saying all that. So that's the crux of it. You still have to tell a good story. You still have to have interesting characters, regardless of who they actually are or whatnot. That's a surprise ending. Again, like I said, you can only get that shock one time around. It's a one-trick pony. So once you've got it, you have to make sure that up until that point, you've told a good, compelling, cohesive narrative. Otherwise, once the shock is, there's no reason to go back and revisit the story. So basically, that's it in a nutshell. That's how you kind of work in a twist and or surprise ending. It's and twist can come in very the story, obviously, usually either the middle or the end though. But yeah, so just don't get so hung up on the ending that you forget that until you get to the ending, you have to tell a good story. Tell a good story. Tell an entertaining story. Get your shock, and then give the audience the fun of going back and experiencing the story, albeit from a new perspective, but giving them the chance to experience the story again and have a good time with it, even if it's now going to be different. So that's pretty much it. That's how you kind of work in a surprise ending and or twist. It's it's not that much different really than telling any other story. It still has to be an interesting story. It still has to have a compelling narrative, compelling characters. The other thing I would warn too is don't try to make your surprise so complex with so many layers that because if you do that, then you're running the risk of not being able to tie everything up, because sometimes there are instances where you have a surprise neighbor. Well, how does that work? But what about this though? It's like, keep it simple. If you look at The Sixth Sense, you look at Fight Club, it was very simple. Bruce Willis's character set up the precedence for it, that these are ghosts that need help, and some of them don't even realize they're dead. He was talking about himself, and if you look at it, there was no complex scene where his character had to really work around characters that couldn't see him. They use a very minimal shots where you see him sitting across from somebody right at the end, where it's implied that he was having a conversation, but it's such a minimal amount of time with him on screen that you don't really question it. But then when you go back and realize that, oh yeah, there was nothing to indicate that they actually were. Fight Club. Okay, look at the way everything plays out. It really was just, okay, when he's fighting Brad Pitt, it's him just hitting himself. When he's giving speeches, Brad Pitt's giving a big speech, it's Edward Norton giving the speech, and you just see Edward Norton kind of standing off to the side. It's really just kind of him, that especially if you've ever kind of been beside yourself, and that's essentially what it was. It was kind of a representation of him being beside himself, so to speak. But in the frame of the scene, as it was actually happening, it was just him giving a speech. It was simple. It seems more complex than it is, but when you go back and watch it, you realize, oh, yeah, it's really not that surprising. So at the end, when you get the reveal, you don't find yourself going, well, how does that work? Because you're like, oh yeah, I guess it does make sense. I just never really realized that what I was actually seeing, And again, Fight Club takes it to a more extreme, but something like The Sixth Sense, it was right there in front of you the whole time. Your mind was filling in blanks that it thought was there. And that's kind of the genius of that kind of storytelling. It allows the viewer or the reader to kind of do the patchwork for the creator, so to speak. But, just keep it simple. Don't make your surprise so complicated, so deeply layered that you're finding yourself struggling to go through and dot all your I's and cross all your T's, because you're inevitably going to miss a few. And believe me, your audience is going to find them. And that's what we call plot holes, which will be another video, by the way. So that's it. That's pretty much how you do it. So like I said, just focus on telling a really good story, like anything else, and just don't overthink the surprise. Don't overthink it. Keep it simple. Again, if for a good surprise doesn't need to be overly complex for it to work. I mean, the fact it really just needs to be going against the preconceived notion of the audience. If they didn't see it coming, it doesn't matter how simple it is. They'll be surprised. Don't worry. But yep, so that's gonna do it for this one, guys. So thanks for watching. If you guys have any suggestions or any questions, or something you want me to talk about, any kind of anything that deals with writing, plot, characters, like what do you want me to talk about? If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. And I'll catch you on the next one, guys. Peace.